Hi, everyone. We have quite a few people joining.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yes, lots of attendees coming in. We're just going to give everyone about a minute more, and then we will kick things off and get started. So welcome to all of you who are joining. We're excited to have you here. All right, I think we'll get started if everyone's okay with that. So welcome everyone to today's event, Dynamic Leadership, Why Leadership Coaching is Key to Build Organizational Capability. My name is Anna Killalay, and I'm the Senior Marketing Manager for Marketing Operations at Sounding Board. We're thrilled you could all join us today for our celebration of International Coaching Week. Today's event should be a very interesting conversation. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guests. So if we can follow through to the first on here, perfect. So Lori Mazan. Lori is the co-founder, president, and chief coaching officer for Sounding Board, one of the first 250 ICF certified coaches globally. She has spent more than 25 years coaching C-suite executives to develop critical leadership capabilities. In 2016, Lori partnered with Christine Tao to launch Sounding Board as a feedback-driven, cloud-based leadership coaching platform. She's also certified by the industry's gold standard, the Coaches Training Institute. Lori was a founding member of the Gen and Tech Preferred Network of Coaches. Hi, Lori.
Hi there. Hi, everyone.
Perfect. We also have Edwin Vega with us today. Edwin is a certified executive and leadership development coach and facilitator. In addition to his work as a one-on-one and group coach for Sounding Board, he's on the coaching and leadership faculty at the Coactive Training Institute and is the lead trainer for the Edge Foundation, an organization that offers executive function coaching to at-risk youth. Hi, Edwin.
Hey, really excited to be here.
Awesome. And then last but not least, we have Solu Nwanze. Solu is a certified executive and leadership coach for Sounding Board and the vice president of organizational effectiveness at Zendesk. She is also the founder of Expanded Impact, a coaching and consulting practice. Solu works with leaders and teams through one-on-one coaching and leadership workshops to develop skills that help them thrive while accelerating business outcomes. Hi, Solu.
Hi everyone.
So we're really looking forward to today's discussion with you all. If you have questions for all those attendees during the call, feel free to add them to the chat and we will talk through them at the end, or maybe even add some of those questions during the conversation. So to get started, we have a few polls we'd love for you to answer so we can understand a bit of who our audience is. So the first one here, pretty straightforward. Do you identify as a coach? Yes, no, or not sure? We'll give this a couple seconds to get your responses. Perfect. All right. You can see that majority do. Awesome. Thank you. All right, on to the next. If you're not a coach, what is your primary role? Are you an HR practitioner, an L&D practitioner, a business leader, or other? Awesome. Thank you for responding. Okay. And the next one, if you're a coach, how do you practice? Are you a private practitioner, a coach within an organization, or a coach for a coaching vendor, or other? Perfect. Thank you all so much for participating in those polls. That's really helpful. Wonderful. All right. Great. So now that the polls are finished, I'm going to pass it over to Lori to help move through the agenda. So Lori, over to you.
Thanks, Anna, and welcome everyone. Anna, if you can just post the answers to those polls so everyone who can see who's here. And we really were just asking those questions so we can gear our conversation to the participants as well. really nice to see people from all around the world joining on. So welcome, everyone. This slide right here is some of the questions that we are going to talk about today. I'm pretty sure we're going to veer off of these questions onto all kinds of things. So I hope to have a really in-depth and interesting conversation here about leadership coaching specifically and why leadership coaching can be so useful in an organizational environment. And just so you know, not to take away from any other kinds of coaching, I've been around for a long time and I feel like any kind of coaching is valuable, but we're going to stick to leadership coaching because that's really what Sounding Board provides out there in the world. Super excited to have my colleagues here, Solu and Edwin, and looking forward to our conversation. So maybe you can each start, and we had your official bio, but maybe you can just give a thought or two about why you became a coach and, why you're still a coach. Why are you still a coach when you are an executive at an enterprise company? Why are you still a coach when you're an Oscar winner? Like, why are you still doing this?
All right, Solu, I think you're going to go first. You're the executive.
I love this question, actually. And when people ask me, how did I become a coach? It's really because I experienced coaching. I went to a conference and I got an opportunity to have a 15-minute coaching session. It was life-altering. And I thought I need to bring this experience to others. So I started a speed coaching program. At the time I was working at Adobe. So I started that program at Adobe for professionals from underserved communities to experience coaching. And through bringing that program to life, I got to get into the Coaches Training Institute. Took the first course and I thought found my family, so I went through the whole thing, and that's really the story. But the reason I stay coaching, the reason I continue coaching even with my full-time role, I actually posted something about this yesterday, is that it is nutrition for me. Coaching really is nutrition for me. I learn from my coachees just as much as they learn from me. Coaching has shaped my leadership style in a way that I did not think was possible. And I continue on this transformative journey. I was in a session recently with Marita, one of the founders of CRR Global, about the organizational and relationship coaching technique. And she talked about the day you said yes to coaching, that is the day you began your spiritual journey, to fail continuously and to create from it. And I so much relate to what she said. So that's sort of my story of coaching.
Great, thank you. One, I love that just 15 minutes of coaching could be life-altering. So you must have had a really good coach there as well. And second, I had that experience too, which is so many times after a coaching session, I'm like, I should have paid you. I think I learned more than you did from the session. So I love that it's always kind of this evolving skill set and tool that both parties benefit from.
Laura, as you're saying, it makes me think about the power of coaching. For me is all about the relationship, the coaching relationship that we build with our clients, whether it's individual or groups of people in a coaching session. I got to coaching really through reading Coactive Coaching, the book. I never even had a coach. I read the book and immediately signed up for all the courses. And it just felt like home in terms of not only the community, but what I was meant to do on this earth. My first job was when I was 12 years old. I was a tutor and I was tutoring people who were older than me. And I remember thinking, I don't know what they're working on. I don't know how to do the math that they're doing, but I could make them feel better. I could make them more confident in what they're doing. So from a young age, I've always had this aspect of joining with others to help them better themselves, suffer less. And it turned into coaching, a degree in education. And as you mentioned, I used to be a professional opera singer, so a Grammy Award winner as well. A bit random, but not so random, especially when it comes to leadership coaching, which we might get into shortly.
Yes, great. Thanks, Edwin. And yes, by the way, we are a little CTI exclusive here. I didn't actually intend that. because we have coaches from lots of other training programs as well. But I was certified at CTI. I just found out yesterday that I was like in the first year of CTI when I started taking my courses, because I was certified in 1994. Sorry, I'm old as the hills. So I've seen the profession from the beginning. But what happened to me was I started my career as a social worker. I went back to school and got trained as a therapist and ended up hating it. And I kept trying to ask the question, what have you done differently since last week? And I kept getting feedback from the supervision that, no, you can't ask that question. You have to go back and heal the past. You can't talk about the present. And I was like, what? How is that going to help them? So needless to say, I never practiced therapy. But 10 years later, suddenly there was this thing called coaching. And they were asking my question. And I was like, oh, this was the thing I was looking for. So I was very lucky that I was able to do that at the beginning of the coaching profession. So why don't folks put in the chat where you were trained as a coach, or where you want to be trained as a coach, or even if you were one of those old hands who did self-training long before we actually had any kind of certification. Why don't you share in the chat your background? And we're going to narrow down now specifically to leadership coaching. There's lots of kinds of coaching out there, much of it very useful. We are the folks who specifically coach only leaders in organizations, primarily large enterprise, but also all the way from small startups through mid-sized businesses and to enterprises. So, Edwin, why don't you start this time? Like, why leadership coaching?
Well, I mean, you could just look at the chat box to almost think why. It's amazing to see, one, the span and the range of where people are getting training, which is such a good sign that more coaching is getting to more people. I always feel like the why for me is like, how do we just keep expanding people, have them be able to not only lead themselves, but also through that lead others. For me, a biggest point for leadership coaching is how do we actually scale the impact of coaching? Yes, I could be coaching an executive, but can I coach their team almost through them? Can they leave that session with the amplification? The minute they turn around, the next interaction will be different. From the very onset of our coaching session, can we really dive into what matters? So I'm just loving to see all that's coming through the chat box. It's just an indication that coaching is spreading more, not only in general, but around the world, seeing where these are coming from. So for me, that's really exciting, spreading that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Edwin.
I love that a lot. In fact, totally relate to what you said in terms of the impact of coaching spreading in the teams, and the impact of that then turns into that business outcome, the results that the organization sees from people who are having conversations more from a space of awareness and their best selves, as opposed to a space of their fears. I think that's sort of the beauty that shows up when leadership coaching sort of spreads in an organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm right with you guys on that. It's really the impact. And I had a small coaching group of coaches. We hung around together and got together like once a month to kind of support each other before we had coaching communities. And when one of those parties passed away, one of the other folks counted up like the number of people that coach impacted. And she was a longtime coach for Lee Hecht Harrison. And when we added up the numbers, it was like in the 5 million range, because you're not just impacting that leader, you're impacting that leader's team and that leader's peers and even that leader's leaders and that organization. And it just keeps going out and out. So agreed, leadership coaching has a really big impact. The other is I'm kind of a rebel. I always hate to do what the mainstream is doing. And I kind of felt like, especially in the early days, but even now, coaching is a little subversive. Like in those days, I started coaching in the Fortune 100 companies in the late 90s, early 2000s. And there was still a lot of old school kind of leadership in there. And it was a little bit like changing the company culture one leader at a time and trying to, increase and really sometimes dramatically change from a like command and control style of leadership to a more updated person-centered style of leadership. And, it wasn't easy. So it felt pretty subversive. I think it's still kind of subversive. If you're being coached and somehow you're suddenly able to manage your manager well and influence others in the organization, you have the ability then to create change from inside instead of having that change be, pushed on you from the outside. Oh yeah, please, Solu.
I was just saying, absolutely agreed.
Yeah. So that leads right into kind of this question of, how is leadership coaching transformational, or even is it transformational? So what do you think?
Well, from your first moment when you were sharing, it made me think yesterday I had a completion session with an executive. We did coaching in the park. It was our first time actually meeting in person, which was really cool. Oh. Yeah, which was neat. And to end the relationship there, it was magical to use the park as like a way forward for this person. And I think they said about 4 times, I've only told one other person this, or I've never told this, and I'm going to tell you. Mm-hmm. So the level of trust that I think is really shared in a coaching experience is transformational. Because imagine if I'm the only person, imagine if they didn't have a coach. That means they wouldn't be sharing that with anyone. This could be related to a struggle. This could be related to the needs of the organization where they feel lonely. So there is something about, and I keep saying it over and over about the coaching relationship, that's where we put the focus. The power really, when 2 people come together, it really does feel exponential in that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I love that example. I actually have an example of a closing session with an executive yesterday as well. So it's interesting to have this conversation today. And something that this coachee said that I hadn't thought about yet is, he mentioned to me when he came into coaching, he intentionally picked someone who was going to have a different life experience because he wanted to have a different perspective. And even with that intention, what ended up happening is because the sounding board way we sort of go into coaching right from the start, he was able to get this impact on the goals he wanted, the leadership journey, the leader he wants to be. And he realized that the piece on, and this is maybe a little bit contradicting what you just said, Edwin, but the personalities, so not the relationship per se, but the personalities didn't really matter. Mm-hmm. What mattered was that focus on who do I want to be as a leader. And that was a shift in perspective for him. Mm-hmm. So now imagine taking that newfound perspective into the workplace where you're leading a team of over 100 people, how you relate with people who have different backgrounds and perspectives from you changes. It evolves. And I think that's how leadership coaching is so transformational.
Absolutely. So I actually think it's both of those things. Like I've had lots of people tell me I never told anyone this before in the first session, as well as other sessions. And the last session, like when they tell you that in the first session, something's happening in the relationship that is creating a level of intimacy and trust that they feel free to tell you something they never told anyone else. And, they haven't told their partner, which is like, whoa, somehow this coach is safer to talk about these things than someone who's maybe more invested in them, which I think is one of the big values of coaching in general. I also think Solu's comments about perspective is really important too. So sounding board, we use a matching algorithm to match the coach with the coachee. And the way we do that is we use a style or interaction style survey to kind of identify who they naturally are. And then we do not match them with the person who is just like them. And the reason we don't do that is over 20 years of coaching, I saw that when coaches and coachees are very similar, they tend to collude. and reinforce the same perspective they already have. But we also don't we don't match them with someone very different than themselves, because that makes it harder to create this intimate meeting of the mind things. So we actually have a standard deviation where the perspectives are different, but not so different that people don't understand each other. And that seems to be like the little magic place for coaching to be effective. I want to say just a little bit more about the transformational nature of coaching. And I think that mostly has to do with what each Solu and Edwin are kind of pointing to, which is being able to change how you are thinking. So that can be your belief system. It can be about yourself. It can be about your company. It's your mindset and perception. This is how I think about, delegation, or this is how I do strategic thinking. And that when people gain skills, I can gain a skill of strategic thinking. I think of that as kind of horizontal development, like you're taking a step down the road of strategic thinking. But I think what coaching does is it lets you have vertical development. You're not just adding a new skill, you're adding an entirely new way of thinking about something that then initiates or creates new behavior that's now in alignment with that new thinking. So the style of coaching, you don't have to do rote practice. What you have to do is elevate your thinking and then find behaviors that match that new level of thinking. So I see Solu and Edwin shaking their heads. So jump in.
I'm nodding my head. I'm nodding my head because when you talk about vertical development, it's really about neuroscience, like really changing the neural pathways of what people do. I typically start coaching sessions, usually with a YouTube video from the Prentice group about neuroscience and how the brain works. So they really add some grounding, like fundamental science behind why coaching is effective. And often it's like, oh, the clients already are like, all right, I'm on board. I know there are issues and things I need to improve on. And just seeing that video, it just really sparks them to get going and really invite that transformation from the very beginning.
Yeah.
Lori, I'm sorry to interrupt. There was a question that's applicable to this. The question was the assessment designed in-house?
Okay. Yes. It was designed in-house, but it's based on a model that identifies an interaction style through behavior. So it's not a personality test, and it's a behavior-based assessment where you assess your own behavior, and then we try to match you with someone in this standard deviation of similar behaviors. So it kind of fits with what Edwin's saying, which is we're not talking about, people just subjectively saying this is the right thing. In the assessment, we're talking about a behavioral-based approach. And in a transformational thinking, we're really talking about a behavioral-based approach that's really based in your neurology. And I always use like the road paving analogy. If the road is degraded underneath the paving, like on the coast of California, it doesn't matter how many layers of new asphalt you put on top of there, it's still going to fall down the hill. So instead, you have to go underneath there and fix the foundation of that asphalt and then layer the asphalt on top. So I kind of think of, that approach in your neurology is starting to create new neural pathways in a different way of thinking, and then layer the asphalt on top with your practice around new behaviors that are in alignment with that thinking. So it's just a visual image to think about that. Solu, you were going to jump in.
Yeah, I love that concept of the new paths, right, that you sort of open up with coaching. And I think what's really powerful is when you bring those new paths to your team, you're able to increase the creativity potential in that team or in that organization. And that's where you really begin to see the impact. Now, people's capabilities have increased and their capacities have increased. And that's sort of where that accelerated business outcome sort of comes from.
Right. You're going right to the next question. I kind of feel like coaches know how big of an impact you can have. Why do you think it works so well in the current environment where the pace has really picked up dramatically? We're no longer in the office in a lot of cases. People are remote. The average length of time employees stay at a company is only like 3.4 years for employees and like 4.6 for leaders. When I started coaching, you stayed 20 years at the company. You had 25 years of leadership development before you became an executive, right? Now, I know companies where literally there was zero. It was like, okay, you're the executive now. Go ahead, right? So why is like coaching's having a moment right now, leadership coaching specifically, the demand has gone up really dramatically over the last maybe 3-4 years. Why do you think that is?
Yeah. Well, I can start. When things move so fast, it's easy to fall prey to what I would call the hamster wheel syndrome. And that is you just keep doing the same thing over and over again, getting the exact same results. You're not really thinking about impact. You're not thinking about impact on the system, but you're just executing. And I think coaching is one approach that helps you to slow down, be intentional. And when you're intentional and reflective, you're able to make those new connections we talked about earlier. You're able to see different paths. And when you see different paths and take different paths, you get different results. So I think that is one way that coaching is very effective, particularly when you're in this high and fast-paced environment.
Well, to that environment also, I think you're talking to us about how do we create a coaching culture? Right? Like, yes, I'm coaching this one person, but can we actually get other people within that organization to listen better, collaborate better, be more strength focused, own their strengths? I feel like a lot of leadership coaching is about helping the coachee really own who they are, own their strengths unapologetically to really push forward leadership effectiveness.
Oh my gosh, so much juicy stuff in those 2 comments. So I'm going to backpedal to Solu for a moment. Like, the coaching opportunity is time to focus on yourself and your own development, not just the outcomes required for the business. And I think it's hard, the demands from the outside to execute and show that execution is really big in companies today where less people are doing a whole lot more work. But if you don't take that time to grow yourself, then just like Solu said, you start to dig yourself into a rut. And the coaching culture thing, I think, is really great. I actually think that's one of those circles of impact that happens just from coaching in general. Like my experience is after I coach someone for a while, they naturally just pick up those skill sets and start coaching their people. And then they'll tell me a story about, this person. I'm like, you're coaching them. You became a coach now too. And they're like, what? No, I didn't. I'm like, yeah, you did. No, that was a coaching skill you're using. So it's a little osmosis. They start to soak that up and then be able to utilize it in their own organization. And then the last thing Edwin was saying, like really owning who you are and your strengths in an organization, that is actually very new in corporate enterprise America, where, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, maybe even, the winning formula was be like everybody else. Like there's, we're going to wear the same clothes. I actually got fired from my very first job at a big 8 accounting firm because I didn't wear the appropriate clothing. And I refused to wear the appropriate clothing, so they were right to fire me. But at that time, it was like, be like everybody else is the winning formula. But I think our whole societies and globe has gotten so complicated since the advent of the internet and personal computers and information overload, that this change to really being the best leader you can be is the best leader to be, versus here's the way to be a leader. You know, it doesn't matter who you are, you got to do it this way. I think that approach has run out of steam, and that people are finding, organizations are finding that when individuals really do embrace their strength, that's a benefit to the business. It allows people to bring all of themselves to work instead of just a part of themselves. And I love this. Yeah, go.
I was going to say, or act like they're not bringing their whole selves. It's like they had an argument with someone in the morning at home, and they come into the office, and like they just take that off and move forward. Like, we have to really, in leadership coaching, about coaching the whole person, right? Are you living your values in and outside of your role, and really stepping into that? And regardless of your title, are you showing up as a leader? Mm-hmm. You can be a director, you can be the janitor, the receptionist, whoever you are. Can you show up as a leader, match your full potential, call other people forward? That's what's kind of exciting, I think, in the way that leadership coaching can be really fiery.
Yeah, agreed. There's a quote I like. It was from Bill Clinton's campaign advisor, like a zillion years ago. But the quote was great. The guy's name is James Carville. I think he's still on some pundit somewhere on media. But he had a great quote. He said, "You pay me for my mind, I throw in my heart for free." Mm. And it's like, that's what companies want now. Why is there so much resignation and things going on? Because companies, in some cases, are not appreciating this whole person. That means throwing in their heart as well. But when people throw in their heart, now you get commitment. Now you get passionate action. You know, now you get people going above and beyond. If you're just throwing in your mind, no heart, now you get compliance, right? You get that, oh, I did my job. Yeah.
And when people are aligned, right? When those values you described, Edwin, are aligned at work, you're also reducing the pressure in the system, reducing the stress, and that helps to keep burnout at bay. So I think there's that benefit as well in bringing your full self and being aligned from a value perspective.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's a hint for anybody looking for a job, which is make sure before you take the job, your values are in line with the company culture. Because I would say that's one of the top things we see in coaching, when those two pieces are not aligned. Okay. Yeah. Edwin, you mentioned it a little bit earlier. I do this in one of my coaching sessions. Like, is there a standard coaching session, or what would a leadership coaching session look like from your perspective?
I mean, it maybe sound a little cheesy, but everyone looks different. I mean, yesterday I literally went to a park to meet a coachee who I never met before, and we started walking, and they're like, "Oh, this is a real coaching?" And I was like, "Yeah, this is a real coaching." And I said, "We're going to use the environment as a source of wisdom for you." And even at one point, they were complaining about something. I literally had no plan. The one plan I said is, "We're going to walk, but you're going to lead the walk. I won't be leading where we go, in what direction we go." Obviously, I'm having a competency of them leading themselves, taking charge. And they were complaining about something. I said, "Turn around, finish talking about that. We're not moving forward until you stop looking back." Again, just like in the moment. So for me, I feel like leadership coaching is so much about, can you be really present to what's going on? Can you use what's around you and what's most present for the client? And then me as a coach, then I don't have to do work. I'm having fun. I coach sometimes when I'm visiting my dad. And he said, "You were laughing so much, I thought you were working." And I was like, I was working. So there's so much about bringing your personality and who you are, what you stand for as a person, as a leadership coach, which really this is what makes it so much fun for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. I feel like there's uniqueness in every session and also with every coachee. So the way that I may coach person A is going to be different from the way I coach person B, just simply because of what is present, what shows up. In terms of some structure, I am a structure person. So there's some high level structure, I think, in the arc of the coaching that shows up as well, in addition to what Edwin described, as sort of using your environment and to get messages and wisdom. Typically we'll start with some checking in on whatever commitments the coachee had made from the last session, and just checking in to see what showed up. It may be that the person was able to take action towards that commitment. It may be that the person was not. And in either case, you sort of learn something from that conversation. And then we'd go into an area that they want to develop. So typically at the start of the coaching engagement, would have outlined a couple goals they wanted to pursue for that engagement. And we'll go into skill development in one of those areas. Sometimes though, the coachee comes in with something that is just new for them that day, very important that day. And what I found is,
or nothing.
Or nothing, that's right, exactly, or nothing. And even from nothing, there's always something to create. But I find that it's interesting, right? Because again, to your point, we're coaching the person, not the problem or the challenge they're coming with. So in whatever shows up in the session, the person is still learning something about themselves. They're still developing an awareness of who they are, and they're using that to carry themselves forward. And so through the coaching conversations, I do like to end with some kind of connection back to what was resonant for them. What was valuable? What are they taking away from that conversation? And that leaves them in a state of reflection. So as they go about their day or their week, that is behind, in the back of their minds, and they're able to see more, right? We talked about perspectives earlier. They're able to see a different perspectives just by holding that reflection point in their minds.
Well, I'm so glad. Usually I'm the artsy one here. I'm like, making up things as I go in a park. And yes, structure is so important. At Sounding Board, we use a leadership roadmap. It's a proprietary tool that we use with all of our coachees at Sounding Board. And what's really great, it creates a structure of keeping track. I think it's so important for leaders to actually keep track of their accomplishments, not only for calibrations or year reviews that they'll have, but for their own self-confidence, so they can actually see and track their growth. And obviously, more important, give visibility to that to stakeholders that can really support them in their growth as a leader. So pointing it forward is a must. In any kind of way in a leadership coaching.
Yeah. The leadership roadmap really useful. One of the places I find it useful is when people have vertically developed to the next level, they forgot where they started. And if you don't go back and say, you started here, you started on level 2 and now you're on level 5 or whatever, however you do it, they actually won't remember, because now they're so embedded in the next level that they forgot about the level before. So it's really useful to track their progress. I thought this was a great example because look, coaching can be effective regardless of your style. If you're more unstructured and spontaneous, it can work really well. If you're more structured and following an agenda, that can work really well. That's just a style preference. Not one is better than the other. Right. So what we do at Sounding Board, we have a set of coaching principles that we ask our coaches to utilize, but that doesn't take away anything around the individuality. I always think of it like the frame of the picture. And then the coach and their client or coachee is actually painting the picture on the inside. So for Sounding Board, every participant has the same frame, but inside that frame, all the pictures are very different. This is kind of leading us towards technology and coaching. So I'm going to go to the last question here is, what do you think the future of leadership coaching looks like? It's very different than when I started now, and I'm sure it's going to be very different in the future too. So what do you two think?
Well, someone in the chat asked a question about how do you create coaching culture within the organization? And I think what's really interesting, as my own practitioner, yes, I can go in and coach an organization, but when you're talking about organizations that have 1, 200, 2,000, the scaling, this is where I think, sounding board has a lot of leveraging. They can really go into a large organization and scale through coaches, like through group coaching, where you're going to have, 6 to 10 people with it in one group coaching session, or on a one-to-one level. So I just think the future of coaching is like, how do we actually scale this to directors? That is, that coaching no longer is exclusive for executives or people on performance improvement plans, which is so good that that's gone away with in general.
Yeah, seriously.
But, I think for me, the future is like, how do we get it in more people's hands? I even do coach training for adults that work with students and how to improve executive function skills. And these are the same skills that I'm working with adults as well. But can we get to people at younger ages? So for me, when I think of leadership coaching, is like access is a really big thing for the future.
Yeah.
And in addition to the access, I think it's also the expectation. So I think in the future of coaching, we're going to start expecting more managers, particularly at the leadership coaching level. We're going to start expecting more managers to coach their employees. And I saw that question about, creating coaching culture. One is bringing in organizations like Sounding Board to help with providing that access, as you described, Edwin. And then these leaders begin to exhibit it, and they're also expected to be effective coaches. And when they do that, then their employees have that impact we just talked about, with sort of the skilled impact of coaching. And perhaps also managers become even maybe rewarded for their ability to coach their employees. So I think that is another trend we're seeing in the future of leadership coaching.
Yeah, I kind of feel like people are figuring out that coaching skills are actually good management skills.
Oh, absolutely. I think Google did a research for over a decade about effective managers and found that the number one skill of effective managers is coaching skills.
I know. I laughed when I saw that. It was like, Google, you need to take 10 years to figure that out.
Hey, Lori, everything takes time. But I think what's really cool is it's just pointing to like how I actually think coaching is a leadership competency that is required. I think it's kind of implicit in the work that we do, but I mean, it's indicative of like what we're asking our coachees to do. It's like, hey, this is like bare minimum. This is where we're starting. This is why we work with, coachees for 6 to 12 months, if not longer, in a leadership coaching space. Another distinction often from more of your standard life coaching, it kind of changes that way.
Yeah, for sure. One other thing I think is in the future of coaching and leadership coaching, all coaching, is just a more community-oriented approach for coaches. Like probably for the first 12 years at least of my private coaching practice, I just was totally independent. I didn't even know any other coaches. I was just literally doing my thing. And then I had to put together my own coaching groups to have colleagues and that kind of thing. And I think there's lots of ways for coaches to be in community now at companies like Sounding Board. Now, the Coaches Training Institute has lots of ways to connect, which of course they were new, so they didn't have that at the beginning. But I have found that to be something that was missing in the early parts of the industry, and that is coming into play now in a really, really nice way. Another thing I think is changing is coach development tended to be just adding new tools or new certifications. And now as the industry is maturing, it's starting to shift now towards really developing your foundational or core skills to a deeper level. So it's almost like that same change. Like previously it was horizontal development. I add another tool. But now the industry is starting to add vertical development, which is how do I deepen my current skills? How do I think at a different level about what I'm doing right now? And I think that will really push the coaching industry to a much higher quality of delivery as well.
Yeah, and we can't be remiss to not mention technology. Like I'm using Zoom now, using whiteboards and Jamboards and all these different tools of technology to keep accessing different kind of channels of learning for the coachees as well. So I'm really interested to see where technology takes coaching as well.
Yeah, that's obviously a big one. Yeah. Okay, we're at 45 minutes, so I want to make sure we leave some time for questions. So Anna, do you want to jump in and throw some questions at us here?
Yeah, sure. We have some really good questions from the group on here. So one of the first ones that I think would be helpful to answer is this person would like to hear how Sounding Board describes and defines leadership coaching. So for example, learn a little bit more about who the audience is for coaching and what are the values emphasized across the program.
Okay. I mean, obviously I can talk about that. Do either of you want to say anything about that? We'll see if we have the same point of view.
Go ahead, Lori.
I'm looking at the question. I mean, look, from my experience, Sounding Board is really about expanding access to coaching. There's a lot of directors that are getting access to coaching, new managers, people who have never managed anyone before. They've been top performers as individual contributors. Ding, 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 optimal time for leadership at the foundational level of that. So I feel like that is a target group that we work with, which really is helpful.
For sure. So that's how we started really trying to move coaching out of the executive suites and out of a very limited distribution to much broader access for all leaders. Another thing that was interesting about my own coaching career is the first 10 or 12 years also in the Fortune companies, I only coached males. I did not have one female coachee before 2010. And so to me, bringing coaching earlier to leaders' professional development is going to start to create more diversity in the upper ranks because people are going to be better leaders, more seasoned leaders, and start that pathway earlier. In terms of Sounding Board, we're a capability-based approach. So we have a set of leadership capabilities, or we use the company's leadership capabilities, and that's how we measure development. But that's, again, just the external frame, because how you get that development is the picture inside the frame. It's very helpful to have an external frame. It's a way we can share development with the customer organization that's paying for the coaching and help them understand the value of that coaching. But it's not particularly the outcome of the coaching we're looking for. We're looking more for the outcome where the person's having vertical development, and then that shows up in an increase in their leadership ability. That's visible to others. So we have feedback from others because we think it's not enough for you to think you developed. Other people have to see that you developed as well and that you're doing something different in the organization.
Well, even Lori, this is reminding me of how, when we work with some leaders, we actually have an alignment meeting with their manager or sponsor at the beginning of the coaching series. And then at the end, to actually have an open conversation around those goals and areas of improvement. And then obviously tracking successes, another distinction of leadership coaching, which doesn't get covered in training so much. So I think this is why it's so important to have a conversation like we are today.
Mm-hmm. It's also really a change in the industry because at the beginning, everything was hidden behind closed doors. It wasn't considered a good thing to have a coach. It meant you were a derailed executive. And so no one wanted anyone to know they had a coach. And so it was secret. And that way there was also no tracking of development. So I think it's been a great change that now it's considered actually a win to get a coach. It means you're, high potential and that the tracking is visible. So it's easier to see objectively when people have developed as leaders versus have a lot of decisions made on subjective information.
Great. Okay, so I have a couple more questions for you guys. I think these two questions, they came from two different people, but I think they sort of have a lot to do with one another. The first part of the question is, how do you make managers embrace and deliver performance and career coaching to their associates? And the second part of that is, if the company is paying for the coach, how do you protect the confidentiality while still documenting your value and ROI?
Yeah. So Solu, I'm going to throw that one to you. How do you make them do it? And then we'll talk confidentiality.
Yeah, the question about holding accountability for managers to coach their people is probably the biggest challenge about having managers coach their people. And one way is first through the ranks. We're actually going through similar approaches within my team at Zendesk as well. One way is through the ranks of leadership that there is accountability throughout. So for example, that frontline manager, when they are coaching their people, they also need their manager to be able to coach them and help hold them accountable to that coaching they're giving to their people. So that means that when you define what good coaching is, it is clear in the organization. And there's also executive sponsorship. The most senior level of leadership has to be bought in and really be the one championing that this is something that is important for the organization, so that they see this as a culture shift and not just a task that they need to do. And so with that comes the piece on rewards, right? You have to reward the behavior. That means you need to measure, is this manager effective? And how is that effectiveness of being a coach included in their performance appraisals? And how do they get rewarded for it? So that full cycle needs to be accounted for in helping managers learn the skill and practice the skill.
Mm-hmm. And I think, unlike our economy, trickle down actually works in coaching. So I actually find that people who are coached naturally start coaching their people because they understand the value. So that would just be an argument towards giving, more and more leaders coaches.
And then at Springboard, we use a leadership roadmap to promote our coachees to actually share that information, so that makes a big differentiator, which is cool.
Yeah, for sure. Confidentiality, by the way, we're very cognizant of confidentiality. Although the company or the corporation is paying for the coaching, we train them up front that they will not get access to the content of the coaching. It stays between the coach and the coachee. And with technology, we call them the coachee, the client, the choice about what's visible. So we have a goal setting module, and the coachee determines, can my manager see this? Is this my private goal? So it's totally up to the person being coached what's visible. And then surveys, we use surveys to show different things. And again, we have a little icon that shows who can see this. So nobody's surprised or taken aback around what they might have shared, and then who sees that. So, and then in terms of actual content, we don't share anything about that. So what we try to measure is things visible to the outside, not anything that's happening inside the actual coaching relationship and interaction.
I'd like to add one piece to what you said, which is that relationship Edwin was talking about earlier with the coachee and the coach, particularly when it comes to leadership coaching. I think with regards to the concept of privacy, as a coach, I encourage my coachee to share some things with their manager or with their employees, depending on what the case is, right? So for example, if I have a coachee who is a senior leader talking about expectations they have of their relationship with their manager, this is a great chance to bring that into your next conversation. And then they're up-leveling and upskilling themselves and how they have difficult conversations, which is a very important skill as a leader. Mm-hmm. And the same thing with employees, right? There's something you're expecting of your employees. Are they aware that this is an expectation? Have you made that expectation clear? How do you have that conversation? So I think that as a coach, you have the opportunity to show these perspectives to the coachee so that they understand how transparency and clarity can be quite powerful tools in their leadership.
Yes, it gives them the opportunity to manage their own perception with their manager or others in the organization. But that's the key. It's up to that individual. It's not up to Sounding Board to share that information. It's their career, their leadership, their life. So it's up to them. One last thing we do there is we don't allow interaction between the manager and the coach without the coachee or the employee being present. And that's because I saw a lot of times a coach and a manager kind of gang up on the participant there. And so we don't allow that. We allow the conversations, but then the person you're talking about has to be in the room too. Otherwise, it kind of isn't very fair. So that's how we handle that part as well.
Wonderful. Thank you guys for your responses. So I have one last question that I think you'll all have very thoughtful answers to. So this one is, what are some key prerequisites for becoming an effective coach?
Mm.
You can talk all day, probably.
I put it in the chat, and I'll probably take a piggyback of what Lori was saying from the beginning. You have to do your own vertical development. Like if you want to be a coach, and some people, it's going to be like Lori, you're going to be an executive somewhere, and then you become a coach. Being an executive or a leader with an organization will put you through vertical development, whether you want to go through it or not. And then if you don't, like, let's say myself, I was a performer. I was performing on stages in front of 2,000-3,000 people. I was doing my job in front of 3,000 people who were judging me night after night. That gives you a lot of vertical development in many ways. So it's like, what is your path to your vertical development? And then let that inform how you coach and what you bring to the coaching relationship.
Totally agree. And I think having your own coach is also an important way of developing as a coach. There's formal training, there's just a practice and experience of it, but there's also being coached that is part of that journey as a coach.
Mm-hmm. Agree with both of those, like the self-awareness and then the experience of coaching, critical. I think another thing, and by the way, you don't have to have done the person's job to coach them, right? That's kind of, I think, part of Edwin's point. That's not required. You have to maybe understand what they're going through, but you don't have to have done it themselves. I wasn't a CEO, and I coached a lot of CEOs over time. The last thing I would say, and I ask this to every coach who comes into Sounding Board, like, what's your philosophy of change? Like, how do you actually think people change? And I found that like 80% of coaches don't know or don't have a philosophy of change. So I would really encourage you to understand the change process that you are the facilitator or spark of, and be able to articulate how you think change happens through your coaching. And obviously it's variable by the individually, but there's usually some kind of standard pathway that you're going down. And to come up with that philosophy, you have to dig pretty deep around who you are and how you think change happens for others as well. So it's a great introspective thing to do as a coach.
Wonderful. Well, I think that's all we have time for today. So thank you so much, Lori, Solu, and Edwin, and everyone who took time out of very busy days, I'm sure, to celebrate International Coaching Week with us at Sounding Board. It's a very important week for us, as you can imagine. We enjoyed interacting with you all and digging into some of the nuances of leadership coaching and what it takes to create dynamic leaders. So thanks again for your time.
Thanks, Solu and Edwin. So fun to have this conversation with you.
Same here.
Yeah, thank you, Lori. Thank you, Solu. Thank you, Anna.
Bye now.
Bye.